My grandson Marcus was 8 years old when he asked the question. He asked it at his Aunt Sandra's baby shower on a Saturday afternoon in September, in the living room of the house where my daughters had grown up, surrounded by pink balloons and gift bags, and the particular assembled warmth of 23 women who had come to celebrate a new life, and who were not, most of them, expecting the afternoon to contain the specific moment it contained. Sandra said what she said at 2:17 in the afternoon. I know the time because I had just looked at my watch. Not for any particular reason. Simply the habit of a woman who has managed schedules for 67 years and who checks the time the way other people check their breathing. 2:17. Sandra was unwrapping a gift. A small white onesie with something embroidered on the front that I couldn't read from where I was sitting. She held it up for the room to see, and the room made the sounds that rooms make at baby showers when something small and white is held up. And Sandra smiled the smile she had been smiling all afternoon, the particular smile of a pregnant woman at her own baby shower who is the center of attention and who has been waiting for this specific kind of attention for a very long time. Then she looked at Renee, and she said, "At least my baby has a dad." The room went quiet in the way that rooms go quiet when something has been said that cannot be unsaid. 23 women processed the sentence. Renee processed the sentence. I processed the sentence. And Marcus Jr., who was sitting beside his mother on the couch with the focused attention of an 8-year-old who had been very good for 2 hours and was beginning to reach the limits of his patience with adult social occasions, looked up from the small toy he had been quietly examining. He looked at his Aunt Sandra. He looked at his mother. He looked at Sandra again. And then he asked the question. Before I tell you what Marcus asked, I need to ask you something. If someone said something cruel to your child, deliberately, in front of 23 people, with the particular calculation of someone who has been saving a comment for the right audience, what would you do? Would you respond immediately? Leave the room? Say nothing because it was a family occasion and the room was full of people? Or would you do what Renee did? Sit very still, take one breath, and wait for your 8-year-old son to ask the question that you had not asked, and that turned out to be the only question that needed to be asked? Tell me in the comments. I read every single one. And if this story is already finding something in you, if you have ever watched someone you love be diminished in public and held your breath waiting for what comes next, please like this video and subscribe to Still Waters. New stories arrive here regularly, and every one of them runs deeper than you expect. Where are you watching from right now? And what time is it there? Let me take you back to the beginning, because the question Marcus asked at 2:17 on a Saturday afternoon did not come out of nowhere. It came from 8 years of being raised by a woman who taught him that the right question, asked at the right moment, is always more powerful than the loudest answer. My name is Dorothy Mae Washington. I am 67 years old, and I have 2 daughters, Renee Louise, born in 1985, and Sandra Marie, born in 1979, 6 years before her sister, in a household that organized itself differently around each of them, in ways that neither of them fully chose, and both of them fully absorbed. Sandra was the eldest. In our family, as in many families, the eldest child occupied a specific position, not the favorite, not exactly, though the word has its uses. The first, the one around whom the family first organized its understanding of what a child was and could be and should become. Sandra had my husband Walter's practicality and his particular relationship to security, the deep need for it, the specific anxiety that arrived when it felt threatened. She had grown up into a woman who managed her security through the accumulation of the things that communicated it: the right husband, the right house, the right occasions at which the right people were present. Thomas was a good man. I want to say that clearly, because Thomas was not the problem, and was in fact one of the more straightforwardly decent people in this story. He worked in insurance. He was reliable. He came to family occasions with the easy warmth of a man who had always been comfortable with his wife's family, and who had no particular investment in the tensions that existed within it. Sandra had wanted a baby for 7 years. The wanting had become, over those 7 years, something more complicated than wanting. It had become a measure of whether the life she had built was complete, whether the accumulation of things that communicated security had produced the specific thing she needed to feel that the security was real. A baby was the last piece. and for 7 years it had not come. And then it came. And Sandra, at 44 years old and 6 months pregnant, was radiant in the specific way of someone for whom a long-deferred thing has finally arrived, and who is not yet accustomed to having it. I understood this. I held it with the particular compassion that mothers hold complicated things about their children, not excusing what the complication produces, but understanding where it comes from. Renee was born in 1985. 6 years after Sandra, in a different family than the one Sandra had grown up in. Not because our family had changed dramatically in those 6 years, but because second children are always born into a different family than first children, shaped by the presence and history of the child who came before them. Renee grew up in Sandra's shadow. Not because Sandra cast it deliberately, because Sandra's shadow was simply where the second child stood, in the light that had already been organized around someone else. Renee's response to this was not to compete. Competition requires accepting the terms of the competition, and Renee, from a very young age, had the particular intelligence of someone who understands that the terms being offered are not the only terms available. She created different terms. She was extraordinary in school, not in the way that produces family dinner conversation and report card pride, which Sandra had provided in abundance, but in the quieter, deeper way of a student who is genuinely engaged with learning, rather than with the performance of learning. She asked questions that her teachers were not always prepared for. She read things that were not assigned. She developed in the years between 12 and 18 the specific kind of mind that produces, in the right circumstances, a physician. She became a physician. Cardiology, specifically. The same unit at Grady Memorial, where I have mentioned her working in other stories. Because Renee has been there for 15 years, and it is the center of her professional life in the way that the farms and the businesses have been the centers of other people's. She was 30 years old when she met Daniel. Daniel was a good man. I use the same phrasing I used for Thomas, because both of them were genuinely good men in the specific ways that matter, and it is important not to conflate them with the situations they were part of. Daniel and Renee were together for 3 years, and then they were not. Not because of a specific failure, not because of cruelty or betrayal, or any of the dramatic ruptures that make stories easy to tell, but because they had grown, in 3 years, in directions that were not compatible, and because Renee was 33 years old and understood, with the clinical precision of a cardiologist who has spent her career distinguishing between things that can be fixed and things that cannot, that this was something that could not. She ended it. 2 weeks later, she discovered she was pregnant. She told me on a Sunday morning. "Mama," she said, "tell me." I said. She told me. I was quiet for a moment. Then I asked, "What do you want to do?" She said, "I want to have this baby." I said, "Then you're going to have this baby." She said, "By myself." I said, "With me." There's a difference. She cried a little at that. The good kind. Marcus Jr. was born in February of 2015. He arrived in the world with his mother's eyes and the particular quality of attention that I recognized from watching Renee learn to see the world. The focused, specific, unhurried attention of someone for whom observation is the primary mode of engagement. He was a quiet baby, not a passive one. There is a difference, and it is the same difference I described when I talked about stillness in other stories. He was still in the active sense, processing, taking things in, arriving at conclusions through the accumulation of evidence rather than the urgency of response. He was 3 years old when he asked his first question that made me understand who he was going to be. We were at my kitchen table in Birmingham, and I was explaining to him why the sky was blue. A question he had asked with the focused simplicity of a child who wants an actual answer rather than a deflection. And when I finished the explanation, he was quiet for a moment, and then he said, "What color is it at night when there's no moon?" Not what color is it at night. What color is it at night when there's no moon? The specific condition, the variable that changed the answer. I looked at him. He looked at me with the patient expression of someone waiting for information he has correctly identified as relevant. He was 3 years old. I explained about the diffuse light from distant stars and the particular blue-black of a moonless sky, and he listened to all of it with the focused attention he brought to everything. Then he said, And with the moon? I told him about reflected light. He nodded and went back to his breakfast. He was going to be extraordinary. I knew it at 3. Sandra knew about Marcus Jr. She had known since before he was born. There was no hiding a pregnancy in our family, and Renee had not tried to hide it. Had told the family directly and without drama when she was 4 months along. And the question of Daniel's involvement and absence was already answered. Sandra's response at the time had been controlled, supportive even, in the particular surface way of a woman who understood that the appropriate response was support, and who produced it without entirely feeling it. What she felt, underneath the appropriate response, I had always suspected, and never been able to confirm until the baby shower. She felt that Renee had something she did not have. Not Marcus Jr. specifically. Sandra had not wanted a child at 33, had been in the middle of building her life with Thomas, and had not been ready. What Renee had that Sandra did not have was the particular ease of someone who had made a difficult choice and had not been destroyed by it, who had chosen her own path, paid the cost it required, and arrived, 8 years later, with a son who asked what color the sky was when there was no moon, and a career that required her to keep hearts beating, and a life that was, by any measure Sandra could apply, full. Full in a way that Sandra's life, with all its accumulated security, had not yet felt. The baby was going to fix that. She had believed it for 7 years. She had organized the afternoon around it. 23 women, pink balloons, gift bags, the particular performance of abundance that communicated that Sandra Marie Washington had arrived where she needed to be. And then Renee had walked in, with Marcus Jr., and the afternoon had organized itself differently than Sandra had planned. I need to tell you what Sandra had been saying for 8 years, not the baby shower comment. That was the most visible moment, the one that happened in front of 23 people, and that produced the question that changed the afternoon. But the 8 years before it, the accumulation of smaller things that had produced the specific sentence Sandra chose to say at 2:17 on a Saturday in September. The comments had started before Marcus Jr. was born. When Renee's pregnancy became known, when the family understood that Renee was going to have this baby alone, that Daniel was not going to be present, that Renee had decided that this was acceptable and had organized her life around the acceptability of it. Sandra had begun to express opinions. Not loudly. Sandra was not a loud woman. She was a precise one, and her opinions arrived with the precision of someone who understood exactly what she was saying and exactly what she intended it to do. She said, "I just hope Renee has thought about what this means for the child." She said, "Children need fathers. That's not a judgment. It's just a fact," she said, at a family dinner when Marcus Jr. was 2 years old and was demonstrating the particular focused attention that had been his defining characteristic since birth. He's very serious for a 2-year-old. Is that normal? As if seriousness were a symptom. As if intelligence in a child without a father required clinical explanation. She said these things to my mother and to aunts and at family gatherings when Renee was present and when Renee was not, with the consistent, patient persistence of someone who has a position and is willing to maintain it across years and occasions without requiring any single conversation to resolve it. Renee heard most of them. Renee responded to none of them. Not because she didn't have responses. Renee was a cardiologist who had been keeping hearts beating for 15 years, and who had, in that time, developed the specific calm of someone who understands the difference between situations that require intervention and situations that require patience. Sandra's comments required patience. She was patient. For 8 years, she was patient. And Marcus Jr. grew up in the particular atmosphere of a child who understood, without it ever being said directly, that some people in his family had feelings about his family structure that were not entirely supportive. He absorbed this. He processed it. He arrived, 8 years old, at Sandra's baby shower, with the focused attention he brought to everything, and the particular patience of a child who has learned from his mother that the right question, asked at the right moment, is always more powerful than the loudest answer. I watched the afternoon build, not with any specific anticipation of what was coming. I was not psychic, and I had not predicted the sentence Sandra chose to say, but with the particular attention of a 67-year-old woman who knows her daughters and who understands, from decades of family occasions, that the occasions that are most organized around celebration are often the ones that contain the most unexpressed tension. The tension between Renee and Sandra had been unexpressed for 8 years. Sandra was 6 months pregnant. She was the center of the afternoon. She was surrounded by the evidence of her arrival, Thomas beside her, the house decorated, the gifts accumulating, the particular warmth of 23 women who had come to celebrate something Sandra had wanted for a very long time. And Renee was there, with Marcus Jr., who at 2:15 had said something that made 3 of the women near him laugh. Something I couldn't quite hear, but something characteristically Marcus Jr., the specific combination of accuracy and innocence that produced in adults the laughter of recognition. I had watched Sandra watch Renee receive that laughter. I had watched something shift in Sandra's expression, not dramatically, just shift. The particular shift I had been watching for 8 years across various family occasions. The shift of a woman who is experiencing other people's warmth toward her sister as a subtraction from her own afternoon. And then the onesie. And the room's warmth. And Sandra's smile. And the sentence, "At least my baby has a dad." The room went quiet. 23 women, most of whom had known our family for years, and all of whom understood exactly what the sentence meant and who it was directed at, processed it in the specific collective silence of people who have just heard something they cannot unhear and who are each determining what to do about it. Renee was very still. I watched her. I had spent 38 years watching Renee in difficult moments, and I knew her stillness the way you know a person's breathing. Not by thinking about it, but by the immediate awareness of when it changes. This stillness was the particular kind she used when something large had arrived and she was deciding, with the clinical precision of a cardiologist, what it required. It required patience. For approximately 4 seconds. Because at the end of 4 seconds, Marcus Jr. put down the small toy he had been examining and looked at his Aunt Sandra. He looked at her with the focused, unhurried attention that had characterized him since he was old enough to focus on anything. He said, "Aunt Sandra?" The room was completely still. Sandra looked at her nephew. She had the expression of a woman who has said something and is processing the room's response to it, not yet certain whether the response was what she intended. Marcus said, "Does having a dad make someone love you more?" The room did not move. Sandra opened her mouth, closed it. Marcus said, "Because Grandma Dorothy loves me, and Mom loves me, and my teacher Mr. Henderson loves me, and Uncle Raymond's kids love me. And you?" He paused, with the particular precision of a child who is completing a sentence he has thought about carefully. "You love me too, right?" Sandra said. "Of course Marcus said, "So why does it matter if my dad is there?" He said it the way 8-year-olds say things that adults have been avoiding saying, directly, without performance, with the specific innocence of someone who has not yet learned that some questions are not supposed to be asked out loud. The room was absolutely silent, not the uncomfortable silence of people who don't know what to say, the particular silence of 23 women who have just heard an 8-year-old say the only thing that needed to be said, and who are each, in their own way, sitting with the weight of it. Sandra looked at Marcus. She looked at Renee. She looked at the onesie in her hands. And Thomas. Quiet Thomas. Reliable Thomas. The man who came to family occasions with easy warmth and no particular investment in the tensions within them. Thomas reached over and put his hand over Sandra's. Not to rescue her. Not to manage the situation. Just to be present. Which was, I thought, the most useful thing anyone could have done at that moment. Renee looked at her son. She said, "Come here, baby." Marcus went to her. She put her arm around him. She looked at Sandra. And she said something I had not expected. She said, "Sandra, I'm going to tell Marcus Jr. about his dad when he's ready to hear it. About what happened and why things are the way they are. And he's going to be fine. Not because he has a dad or doesn't have a dad, but because he knows he's loved." She paused. "I hope your baby knows that too," she said. "From the beginning. That's all any of us can do." The room was very quiet. Sandra looked at her sister. For a long moment she said nothing. Then she said something that I had not heard her say to Renee in 8 years of comments and positions, and the particular persistent management of a feeling she had never addressed directly. She said, "I'm sorry." Just that. "I'm sorry." Not elaborated. Not explained. Not accompanied by the particular qualifications that apologies sometimes carry when the person offering them is not entirely certain they are sorry. Just, "I'm sorry." Renee looked at her sister. Then she said, "I know." And Marcus Jr., who had been sitting beside his mother through all of this, with the focused attention he brought to everything, looked at his Aunt Sandra and said, "Are you going to name the baby something good?" The room laughed. The real kind. The kind that happens when tension has been present for a long time and has just been released by something that is both true and entirely unexpected. Sandra looked at her nephew, and she laughed too. Thomas came to me after the gifts were opened, and the cake had been cut, and the afternoon was finding its way toward its end. He sat beside me on the couch near the window where I had been sitting for most of the afternoon. He said, "Mrs. Washington." "Thomas," I said. He said, "That boy." "I know," I said. He shook his head slowly. 8 years old, he said. "Yes," I said. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Sandra has been carrying that comment for a long time." "I know," I said. He looked at the room. At Sandra across the room talking to her mother. At Renee near the door with Marcus Jr. on her hip, in the way she had been carrying him since he was born, and that was going to stop being physically possible soon. But that neither of them had acknowledged yet. "She loves Renee," he said. "She just doesn't know how to love her without." He stopped, without measuring. "I know," I said. He said, "I've been trying to help her with that." "I know you have," I said. He looked at me. "Do you think," he started, "do you think it's going to be different after today?" I thought about Sandra's face when Marcus asked his question, about the particular expression of someone who has just heard their own feeling reflected back to them by an 8-year-old in a form they cannot argue with. "I think," I said, "that today gave her something to think about that she hasn't been able to give herself." He nodded. Then he said, "He's something. That boy." "He is," I said. "Renee did well," he said. "Yes," I said. "She did." Renee and I drove home together after the shower. Marcus Jr. fell asleep in the back seat within 4 minutes of the car starting, in the way of children who have expended significant social energy and have reached the end of their resources. Renee drove. I sat in the passenger seat. For a while we were both quiet, with the particular quiet of two people who have been through something together and are sitting with it before they put it into words. Then Renee said, "Did you see it coming?" "The comment," I said. "No." "The question." I paused. "He surprises me every time." She smiled. "How does he know to ask those things?" she said. I thought about the question. "He pays attention," I said. "And he loves you. And when you love someone and you pay attention, you understand what they need, even at 8. She was quiet for a moment. Then, "Do you think she meant to hurt me?" I thought about the honest answer. "I think," I said, "that she meant to say something true about her life, and it came out as something hurtful about yours. Those aren't always the same intention." Renee looked at the road. "I've been waiting for her to say it out loud," she said. "For 8 years." "I know," I said. "It's almost a relief," she said. I thought about that. "Yes," I said. "I imagine it is." Another silence. Then Renee said, "What do I do now?" I thought about Sandra's face, about "I'm sorry," about the particular quality of an apology that arrives without qualification. "I think," I said, "you give her the chance to be different, without requiring the difference to happen immediately." Renee nodded. And in the back seat, Marcus Jr. slept. Sandra called Renee the following Tuesday, not to have a full conversation, not yet, but to say something she had not said at the shower, something she had apparently been working toward since Saturday afternoon. She called in the evening, when she knew Renee would be home after her shift. Renee told me about the call the following Sunday. She said, "Sandra called." "I know," I said. "What did she say?" "She said that Marcus Jr.'s question stayed with her all weekend," Renee told me. She said she kept hearing it. "Does having a dad make someone love you more?" She said. Renee stopped. She said she realized she had been asking herself that question about her own baby for 7 years, whether the baby would be more loved because it would have Thomas. More. She stopped again. More legitimate, she said. That was the word Sandra used. I sat with that. I thought about 7 years of wanting a baby, and the specific shape that wanting had taken, and what it had been about. Renee said, she said she's been afraid that her baby wouldn't feel loved enough. And she took that fear and pointed it at me instead of looking at it herself. That's honest, I said. It's very honest, Renee said. What did you say? Renee was quiet for a moment. I said, your baby is going to feel everything you feel. So the best thing you can do for her is feel the right things. I looked at my daughter. That's very good, I said. She smiled. Then she said, I told her I loved her. And Sandra? She cried, Renee said. The whole time. The baby was born in December. A girl. Sandra named her Joy, not after anyone. Not as a family name or a tribute. Just Joy. The specific thing Sandra had been trying to find for 7 years. And that had arrived, finally, in December. 8 pounds 4 ounces, with Thomas's nose and Sandra's eyes. Renee went to the hospital. She brought Marcus Jr. He stood beside the hospital bed and looked at Joy with the focused, unhurried attention he brought to everything. Then he said, She's small. She is, Renee said. She's going to get bigger, he said. Yes, Sandra said. She is. He looked at Joy for another moment. Then he said, I can teach her things, when she's bigger. Sandra looked at her nephew. I'd like that, she said. He nodded, as if it were settled. As if the arrangement between them, the 8-year-old who asked the question, and the baby who had not yet asked anything, had been agreed to. Marcus Jr. came to me in Birmingham for a weekend in January. He came every year for what we called Grandmother Weekend. 2 days of no school, no schedule, just the two of us and the particular unhurried time that grandmothers and grandchildren have when there is nowhere to be and nothing required. We were at my kitchen table on Saturday morning. He was eating cereal. He said, Grandma Dorothy. Yes, I said. He said, did I do something bad at Aunt Sandra's shower? I looked at him. What makes you ask that? I said. He was quiet for a moment. He said, everyone got very quiet when I asked my question. And sometimes, when everyone gets quiet, it means someone did something wrong. I thought about the most accurate answer. No, I said. You didn't do anything wrong. He considered this. Then, did Aunt Sandra? I thought about that. She said something, I said, that she shouldn't have said. And then you asked a question that helped her understand why she shouldn't have said it. He nodded slowly. Like when Mr. Henderson asks us questions in class, he said. Not to embarrass us, to help us think. Yes, I said. Exactly like that. He ate his cereal. Then he said, Is Aunt Sandra okay now? Yes, I said. I think she's going to be okay. Good, he said. He finished his cereal. He put his bowl in the sink, something Renee had been teaching him since he was 4, the particular ordinary competence of a child who has been raised to contribute to the spaces he inhabits. He said, Can we go to the garden today? Yes, I said. We can go to the garden. And we went to the garden. And the January morning was cold and clear, and the particular stillness of a Birmingham winter morning settled around us as we walked. And Marcus Jr. asked 17 questions about the dormant plants and what was happening underground and whether the cold hurt them and what they would look like in spring, and I answered every one. Joy was 4 months old when Sandra brought her to Birmingham. Not for a family occasion. Sandra called me on a Thursday and asked if she could bring Joy to visit on Saturday, and I said yes, and she came. Thomas stayed in Birmingham with the baby. Sandra came alone. We sat in my kitchen, the same kitchen where I had sat with my own daughters for 40 years, where Marcus Jr. had asked about the color of the sky without a moon, where Renee had called me on a Sunday morning to tell me she was pregnant, and I had said with me, there's a difference. Sandra held Joy. We talked. Not about the shower, not directly, not with any agenda of resolution or accounting, but about Sandra, about the 7 years of wanting. about what it had felt like to want something for that long, and about what it felt like to have it now. She talked for a long time. I listened. At one point, she said, "I've been thinking about Marcus Jr.'s question." "Still, I know," I said. She looked at Joy. "Does having a dad make someone love you more?" She said. She said it quietly, not as a question, as the sentence itself, the specific thing her nephew had asked in the particular way it had been asked. I waited. "The answer is no," she said. "Obviously. But I've been asking myself why I thought it did. She stopped. Why I needed to say it. I waited. She said, "I think I was afraid. That I had taken so long. That everyone else had things figured out and I was still..." She stopped. "Still waiting. And when I finally wasn't waiting anymore, I wanted everyone to know. I wanted it to mean something about me that was better than what it had meant before." She looked at me. "And Renee was there," she said, "with Marcus. And she has never needed a moment to be better than someone else's moment. She just has what she has and it's enough." She looked at Joy. "I want that," she said. "I want Joy to grow up with a mother who doesn't need her life to be better than someone else's to feel like it's good." I looked at my daughter, at the woman she had been for 44 years, and the woman she was, slowly and imperfectly, becoming. "Then that's what you're going to give her," I said. Sandra looked at me. "How?" she said. "By practicing," I said. "The same way you get good at anything." She nodded. Then she said, "Did Renee ever..." She stopped. "Was she ever angry?" "About the things I said, over the years." I thought about the honest answer. "She was hurt," I said. "That's different from angry. Hurt can become understanding. Angry tends to become distance." Sandra held Joy closer. "I don't want distance," she said. "Then don't create it," I said. "You know what creates it. You've been doing it for 8 years. Stop doing it." She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "That's very direct." "Yes," I said. "You needed direct." She almost smiled. Then Joy made a sound. The particular small sound of a 4-month-old who has been content and is beginning to be less content. And Sandra shifted her, and the sound resolved. "She's going to be like Marcus Jr., Sandra said. "She already has that." She stopped. "That attention. She watches everything. They're going to be something together," I said. Sandra looked at me. She said, "Joy and Marcus Jr." "Yes," I said. Her face did something complicated, and then uncomplicated. "Good," she said. Marcus Jr. met Joy officially at Easter. The whole family was at my house. The particular organized abundance of an Easter gathering that I had been hosting for 30 years, the same table and the same food, and the particular additions and subtractions of each year's gathering. Marcus Jr. had been told that Joy was coming. He had prepared. I say prepared because there is no other word for what he had done. He had, in the week before Easter, read a book about infant development that Renee had on her bookshelf, which he had borrowed without asking, and which Renee had found him reading at the kitchen table on a Tuesday evening. "You're reading about babies," Renee said. He said, "I need to understand Joy's developmental stage before I interact with her, so I know what she can and cannot process." Renee had called me immediately after this conversation. She said, "Mama." "I know," I said. She said, that he needs to understand her developmental stage. "I know," I said again. "He's 8. "I know." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "He's going to be fine, isn't he? He's going to be extraordinary," I said. "Yes," she said. "He is." At Easter, Marcus Jr. sat beside Sandra on the couch while she held Joy. He looked at Joy with the focused attention he brought to everything. He said, "She can track movement with her eyes now." Sandra said, "How did you know that?" He said, "I read about it." Sandra looked at Renee. Renee looked at her son. He was already making faces at Joy, specific, deliberate faces designed, apparently based on his reading, to produce the optimal visual stimulation for a 4-month-old's developing visual cortex. Joy was watching him with the particular focused attention of a baby who has found something interesting. Marcus Jr. said, "She likes this one." He made another face. Joy's expression shifted toward what would eventually become a smile. Marcus Jr. said, "See?" Sandra laughed, the real kind. "There is something I want to tell you about the questions children ask. They ask what they see. Not what they have been taught to see, not what the adults around them have decided is appropriate to notice, not what the occasion has organized itself around making visible. What they actually see. The specific, unmanaged truth of what is in front of them, observed with the particular clarity of someone who has not yet learned that some things are not supposed to be said out loud." Marcus Jr. saw a room of people who had gone quiet after something was said. He saw his mother, who was very still in the way she was when something large had arrived, and he asked the only question that mattered. Does having a dad make someone love you more? Not to be clever, not to perform a rebuttal, not with any of the adult machinery of argument and position and the management of how things land. Just because he wanted to know, and because he loved his mother, and because when you love someone and you pay attention, you understand what they need, even at 8. I want to tell you this because I think we sometimes underestimate what children see and what they understand, and what they are capable of offering to the adults around them when the adults create the conditions for them to offer it. The conditions Renee created were these. She raised Marcus Jr. to believe that questions were more powerful than arguments, that patience was more effective than anger, that the right moment to say something was the moment when saying it would produce understanding, rather than the moment when saying it would produce relief. She taught him these things not by teaching them, by practicing them, every day, in every interaction, in the specific quiet way that character is transmitted from one generation to the next. And Marcus Jr., at 8 years old, practiced them at his aunt's baby shower, and the question he asked changed something. Not everything. Sandra did not become a different person in an afternoon. The 8 years of comments did not disappear. The particular fear that had produced them did not resolve in a single sentence, but something shifted. The thing that Sandra had been saying indirectly for 8 years was said directly by an 8-year-old. And in the saying, in the particular clarity of the question, Sandra heard it, not as an attack, as the truth. And sometimes the truth, asked in the right way by the right person at the right moment, is enough to begin something. I want to ask you one last thing before we finish. Is there a question you have been afraid to ask, or a question someone needed to ask you, that has been waiting for the right moment? And what would it mean to ask it? Tell me in the comments. I read every single one. And if this story found something in you, if it reached the parent who is raising a child to ask the right questions, or the person who needed to hear one, please like this video and subscribe to Still Waters. New stories arrive here regularly. Stories about the questions children ask and what they produce, and the particular power of an 8-year-old who has been raised to believe that love is enough. Those are the stories worth telling. And before you go, where are you watching from right now? What time is it there? Still waters run deep. Thank you for sitting with me in them.